This lecture video is about the midpoint and distance. So this is the halfway point between 2 points, and the distance is how far 2 points are away from one another. So before we get too far, I guess I should just give you guys the formulas. So the midpoint formula, and this is for 2 points, x sub 1, y sub 1, and x sub 2, y sub 2. So for the midpoint, the x-coordinate of the midpoint is going to be x1 plus x2 divided by 2, and the y-coordinate is y1 plus y2 divided by 2. And so you find the average of the x's for the x-coordinate and the average of the y's for the y-coordinate. And then the distance formula when you're finding the distance between 2 points, it's going to be the square root, and you find the difference of the x's and the difference of the y's. So it's going to be x2 minus x1, and you have to square it, plus y2 minus y1, and you square it. And it doesn't matter what order you do the subtraction in. When you subtract two numbers, you get the same, the absolute values of them are the same, and so when you square them, you'll get the same number. So again, it doesn't matter what order you subtract them in when you're calculating a distance. The big thing that students sometimes will forget is to do the square root at the end. They'll just write this underneath stuff down and then won't carry their square root through the problem. So make sure that you're carrying that all the way through your problem. So our first example, we have the 2 points 5, negative 7, and 2, negative 1. So first we'll calculate the midpoint. So the midpoint formula is x1 plus x2 divided by 2. And then the y-coordinate is y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So we have 5 plus 2 divided by 2, and then the y-coordinate would be negative 7 plus negative 1. Divided by 2. So we have 7 halves, and for the y-coordinate we have negative 8 over 2, which is negative 4. So that's the point that's halfway between the 2 points given. And then our distance, so that's the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. And because this is addition, you could have these the other way around too. That won't matter either. So we'll have the square root, and so we want 2 minus 5 squared plus negative 1 minus a negative 7. And square that. So we have the square root, and 2 minus 5 is negative 3 squared, plus negative 1 minus a negative 7, so that becomes addition, and negative 1 plus 7 is 6, so we have 6 squared. Negative 3 squared is 9, and 6 squared is 36. So we get the square root of 45. And whenever you can simplify your square roots in these problems, you should, and you can simplify the square root of 45. Square root of 45 is 9 times 5, and the square root of 9 is 3, so that would be 3 times the square root of 5. Okay. And you never want to give a decimal answer for these either. You always want to leave it in radical form like that. This next example, negative 3/4, negative 1, and negative 3/2, negative 1. So first we'll find the midpoint. So that was x1 plus x2 divided by 2, and y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So we have negative 3/4 plus a negative 3/2, and then you have to divide that by 2, and then negative 1 plus negative 1, and then divide that by 2. So we have to find a common denominator before we can add these, and negative 3/2 is the same as negative 6/4, so I'm just going to write that right there instead of rewriting the whole thing. And negative 3/4 plus negative 6/4 is negative 9/4, and we're dividing that by 2. And negative 1 plus negative 1 is negative 2. Negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. Now we need to take care of this division, so we have, I'll just do it on the side, negative 9/4, and we're dividing that by 2, and we can put that 2 over 1, and when you divide by a fraction you multiply by its reciprocal, and the reciprocal of 2 over 1 is 1/2. And multiply straight across, negative 9 over 8. So negative 9/8, negative 1 is our midpoint. Then for our distance, we want the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. So that's going to be negative 3/2 minus a negative 3/4. Then we have to square it, plus negative 1 minus a negative 1, and then square it. So this becomes addition, and again we need a common denominator, and this negative 3/2 would become negative 6/4. So I have negative 6/4 plus 3/4, and that's a negative 3/4, and we have to square it, plus negative 1 minus a negative 1 is negative 1 plus 1, and negative 1 plus 1 is 0, and 0 squared is 0. Negative 3/4 squared is 9/16, and the square root of 9/16 is 3/4. So the distance between the 2 points is 3/4. And our last one here just involves some roots. 2 square root of 5 and negative 5 square root of 5, and then the other point is 5 square root of 5 and negative 2 square root of 5. So first we're going to find the midpoint. So that's x1 plus x2 divided by 2. Y-coordinate is y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So we have 2 square root of 5 plus 5 square root of 5, and divide that by 2. And then the y-coordinate is negative 5 square root of 5 plus negative 2 square root of 5, and divide that by 2. And when you're adding and subtracting, we haven't done this yet, but when you add and subtract roots, as long as the roots are the same, exactly the same, you treat them like variables. If they're exactly the same, you can add them. So 2 square root of 5 plus 5 square root of 5 is 7 square root of 5, and then divided by 2. And just leave it right in this form. You can't simplify it any further. And here we have negative 5 square root of 5 plus negative 2 square root of 5 over 2, so that's going to be negative 7 square root of 5 over 2. So this is the point halfway between those 2 points. Next, we'll find our distance. Again, it's x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. So we have the square root, and then we're going to do 5 square root of 5 minus 2 square root of 5, and then square it, plus negative 2 square root of 5 minus a negative 5 square root of 5. And then we have to square that. 5 square root of 5 minus 2 square root of 5 is going to be 3 square root of 5. And square it. Plus, we have negative 2 square root of 5 minus a negative 5 square root of 5. So that's plus 5 square root of 5. And so we get 3 square root of 5. And then square it. So when you're squaring this is two things being multiplied together, so you have to square both the 3 and the square root of 5. And do the same thing here. 3 squared times the square root of 5 squared. Don't forget this is all underneath a big square root. And 3 squared is 9. And square root of 5 squared is 5. Plus, same thing again, so 9 times 5. And so this is 45, and this is 45, and 45 plus 45 gives us 90. And this can be simplified. 90 is 9 times 10, and the square root of 9 is 3, so we get 3 times the square root of 10. And that's the end of the lecture on midpoint and distance. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.